So this is weird. I'm now 65 years old. You guys are mostly pretty younger than that. I started in this area of prediction markets 35 years ago when I was almost 30 years old. So I thought I was kind of old by then, but it's been 35 years since I started in this area. And 25 years ago, I thought I had the governance insight related to that, like 10 years after I started. And in that time, very little has happened. I've never had a grant of any sort. I've been paid as an advisor, but they never want advice. And I was I assisted somebody else on a grant that I'll tell you about. But basically, I've just been throwing out these ideas for a very long time. But recently, some things have happened, and I will brag about that at the appropriate point. So I'm going to not assume that much. So I'm going to go really back to very basics here, and mainly try to inspire you with the possibilities. That's my goal here, is to just show you how big some of the possibilities are here, and maybe then inspire you to do stuff. So I've got 4 sections. I want to tell you about the technology, how it's been tried. There's social science lessons about human nature and how the world works that I'm going to skip for time here, but I could, if you ask about it, I could get back. And then I want to talk especially about proposals for things we could do that we haven't done. And that's where I hope to inspire you. But let's start with the tech. As you probably know, for many centuries, there have been markets where people traded a durable, portable, divisible thing for money, and then that thing has a price, and that price fluctuates. And then people look at that and they say, that's a money pump. All I have to do is guess whether the price is going to go up or down, and then I can walk away with money. Simple, right? If it's going to go up, you buy today, sell tomorrow. If it's going to go down, you sell today, buy tomorrow. Either way, you walk away with cash. So for centuries, that's been a temptation. People looked at that and said, can I guess which way the price is going? And they look at lots of things to guess. And whenever they find something that works, that predicts whether the price goes up or down, they use it. So if they notice the price goes up on Mondays, they buy on Sunday and sell on Tuesdays. And by doing so, they make the effect go away. It no longer goes up on Mondays once they buy on Sundays and sell on Tuesdays. And so people keep trying lots of things to guess which way the price is going. And the net effect of each of those things they find and act on is to get the price to incorporate that information as an estimate of the future price. And so the net effect is the speculative markets, with all these greedy people trying to guess which way the price is going, end up making the prices embody a lot of information about the future price. And that's a spectacular information machine that we can harness. And that's the new thing in the world in the last half century or so. People trying on purpose to harness this machine to get information. And so a concrete example is, if you can put a piece of paper like this that pays $1 if Biden wins the next presidential election, and if you can get people to trade that for cash and get a price going, that price is an estimate of that future event, whether he wins, and that's a probability of that event, and there you are. You made a machine that estimates this future value, and in fact, it's a really good machine. It works great. We know a lot of things about the advantage of this machine. It gives you numbers, and not bullshit, vague words. It's consistent across lots of things. It's frequently updated. It turns out to be hard to manipulate. You don't have to decide who to include. You just let everybody in. It's typically at least as accurate as the alternatives. And you can actually subsidize it so that you get more. And we know some things theoretically about why this works. I'm a professional economist and I know lots of economic theory, but I'm not asking you to believe that theory. You should just believe the data that says that this just keeps working. And we've got lots of that data, and typically, basically, if you have some other mechanism at the same time as this with similar resources on the same question, then either this will do substantially better or about the same, almost never substantially worse. That's the key data point on which we have our hopes. Could we turn this machine onto other stuff we like? First, there's a bunch of tricks for using this machine. Call to your attention. You can have a market maker, which is a nice trick, which allows asynchronous trade. Each person can walk up to it and make a trade without having to wait for somebody else to walk up at the same time. It allows what I call an edit-based interface, which I'll show you in a minute. You show a field of estimates and probabilities, and you ask, find a number you think is wrong, change that number to a better number, and there'll be a bet that goes along with that, and you can just have the interface be find the wrong numbers. And you can subsidize these markets so that it's no longer zero sum for all the people who take the subsidies. And then presumably the idea is that somebody who wants to know the answer that this machine is giving is willing to pay for the subsidies. There are potential ways that people might want to sabotage the world in order to be able to better estimate the world and win their bets. And there are simple ways to deal with that by limiting people's stakes. There's a clever trick that hasn't been tried much, but demonstrated by the Good Judgment Project, which is if you take a bunch of people and you have them play in a test market, and you take the best ones and you have a new market where only they're allowed to trade, that new market's more accurate. Another trick you can use to have more accurate prices. Many people worry about manipulation, but the simple basic result is that for many other institutions, manipulation makes things worse. Here, manipulation makes things better. More accuracy comes from the prospect of manipulators. I could explain that, but I won't unless you ask. We will have time when you will get to decide which things to ask about, but you haven't seen all the options yet. So key idea here is if you have an asset pays $1 if A, and an asset that pays $1, and you have trades in this, there's going to be a ratio of those trades, like maybe 3 to 1. And that ratio is an estimate of the probability of A. That's the key idea of a prediction market. That's the thing I realized in 35 years ago and started doing a lot with over the coming decades. But there's a simple variation, which is you can also do conjuncts and get a probability of a conjunct, and you can get a ratio of something in a conjunct, which gives you a conditional probability. And conditional probabilities are really what you want when you make decisions. And so if you're trying to find a way to make these markets closer to decisions so that they can be valuable, the simple thing to do is to have the markets estimate decision conditional outcomes. And that's this powerful insight I had 25 years ago and wrote about decision conditional markets. And of course, you can also do not just decision conditional probabilities, but expected values, because you can take any number x between 0 and 1, have an asset that pays out according to x, trade it for $1, you get an expected value of x. You can also then get conditional expected values in the same way. And so, again, the key insight is the standard story in decision theory, and decision theory is powerful, is that the reason we want information is because it can inform our decisions. And then for every piece of information you should ask, what decision of mine might that influence? How can I tell? And if somebody wants to sell you on information, the best information they can offer you is directly decision contingent outcomes. If you do this, this will happen. If you do that, the other thing will happen. That's the way to convince someone the most clearly, directly, that the information is valuable to them. So that's this key insight of decision markets. And we can use that for many things, but for an example, imagine people still wanted to have a single-payer healthcare system in the US, and we could have the chance of that estimated from these trades, but we could have the conditional probability of that lifespans would go up if we adopted it from these trades, and then we could compare that to if we did not have it, what's the chance of that, and what's the conditional expectation if we did not do it, and we can compare those conditional expectations. And standard decision theory says to make the choice with the highest conditional expectation. Very straightforward translation. Now, there are some worries people have that if there were only a few traders who could influence the prices, then they might want to bias these odds in order to gain some advantages. But typically, we have a lot more traders than that. And even if that's a problem, one solution is just to sometimes make the decision randomly and have these markets be conditional on that random choice. And that's a complete solution to that problem. But now, there's lots of things you can do with this technology. I'm just going to describe a few of them. You could, for example, have a graphical representation of a distribution. Somebody could edit it, and they'd make a corresponding bet, and you could see their corresponding assets change. You could have a large tree of possibilities, like what's the topic of the next physics Nobel Prize, and people could drill down to anywhere in that tree and edit the probability at that particular level, and that would change the distribution. And there is what I what many of us call combinatorial markets. So the key idea is here is we're going to see a full combinatorial distribution over all possibilities, and we're going to have an edit-based interface to it. So imagine you're a company with some product, and you have two competitors, and you have a dashboard of the sort that tells you some features of your products and your competitors' products. Obviously, you might be able to, say, drill down into one of them and get a distribution rather than just an expected value. Or, of course, you might take a number you think is wrong and edit it, and then the corresponding bet would be offered to you. And if you're willing to make that bet, then the edit will happen, and then the new number will be the number you set. Somebody can change it back 5 minutes later, of course. But to make this a combinatorial interface, we're going to add also the facility not just to edit any number you see, but to assume any number you see. That is, assume that this happens in March. And now every other number you see is conditional on that assumption. And you can make more assumptions. And every number again you see will be conditional on those assumptions. And of course, you'll want to keep track of how far down you drilled into the space of scenarios, because this is getting unlikely. But still, now you can make an edit, and you're making a conditional edit. An edit on this estimate. So you can see how you can, in this way, explore a full combinatorial space of estimates with a straightforward edit-based interface. So these are some of the technologies that are feasible in prediction markets. Now I'm going to tell you about some of the things that have been done with prediction markets. First of all, there have, for a long time, of course, been many betting markets. That's an old thing. And there are new web-based betting markets. Have been for a while. Some of them real money, some not. And these will continue. But the thing I think is interesting is markets where the customer isn't the person who just wants to have fun betting or wants to brag about their track record, but somebody who wants the information and is therefore willing to pay for the information. And we actually had, in the last few decades, hundreds of firms experimenting with this. They have internal markets, say, on topics of interest to them. And typically, they're accurate. Typically, users like them. We have particular cases where we have long data series of, say, markets compared to US presidential elections, typically finding the markets are more accurate 3/4 of the time. Markets don't respond to debates like the polls do. And we have a lot of basically data sets where people compared a market to something else at the same time on the same topic with similar resources. And again, the claim is consistently, either the markets do substantially better or about the same. And that's the reason you should be excited, because now you should ask, well, I have questions. I have things I might want to know about the world or the impact of my decisions. And we all have things. Why don't we use this to answer those questions? We have some examples of decision markets. So implicitly, presidential election markets typically have markets in who will win, but they also have markets in who will be nominated. And the ratio of those prices is just the conditional probability of winning if nominated, which you realize is advice to the party about who to nominate. And they have often given substantial differences about who has a better chance of winning. We don't know that the parties actually looked at this, but once upon a time, a while ago, there was a blockchain size question for Bitcoin, and we actually, a system I was part of, made some conditional markets on if what the market cap would be conditional on making this choice a while ago. So first of all, in terms of these decision conditional things, there have been some DAOs lately, particularly the Meta DAO that's implemented Futarchy for about a year, done a half dozen decisions according to the report, and they've apparently sold this service to a couple of other DAOs which haven't done much yet but are planning to use for Futarchy. Finally, I'll talk about an example of combinatorics. I was part of a project called SciCast. This was the one case I was a subcontractor on a grant. I helped develop the algorithms for this project. So the key thing was we had over 1,000 topics, and we had a Bayesian network that represented the beliefs across all these topics. And we developed a way to allow anybody to edit any part of this network, not just the nodes, but the connections, or even add connections or take them away, and to exactly update the probabilities and assets for every user based on every edit. And we implemented that, and that software has been available for now, and we ran that for 18 months. And that's basically just a demonstration of the feasibility of large networks of beliefs with an exact representation of probabilities that connects them. But there hasn't been much demand for this since then, unfortunately, but you're supposed to be impressed. So there is that thing. So I said I have a section on lessons, but I fear I don't want to, we could come back to it if you ask, but in the interest of time, I'm going to jump on to the proposals. Now, the first proposal I'd like you to consider is about the existence of management in firms and what they do. So, as you know, most organizations have many parts and they need to be coordinated, and our standard mechanism of coordination is to put somebody in charge of coordinating. The king, if you will. But this is a big task and it's difficult. So we pay them a lot to try to make it work better, and we give them lots of assistants. Lots of people who work with them to detect. So every task we can take off this person's plate and hand to an assistant's plate, the more this person can deal with all the other tasks. And that's a way management improves over time, as we learn how to take tasks off their plate. And these are the many kinds of things that already have assistants doing these tasks that the central manager doesn't have to do anymore. And a question is, could we have predicting outcomes also be one of the tasks we take off their plate, and even choosing among pre-existing combinations? That is, there was a bunch of paper, news article that says the end of management when I talked about prediction markets and management, and that's silly. If you take away these tasks from managers, they have plenty of other stuff to do. So it's not the end of management. It might be the end of managers doing certain kinds of things that they previously had to do because nobody else would do it for them, right? So the key idea here is that we already have cost accounting, and that is an important thing in organizations for measuring, flows of resources, et cetera. But there's lots of other things that happen that we're not measuring. And if we could measure those, we could have better corporate accounting. And what I want is information accounting. That is, whenever there's a meeting and people talk about what to do and then they do something, we almost never account for who said what and who influenced the decision which way in order to keep track of it the way we do with costs. We keep track of costs, who spent how much. We don't keep track of information, where it came from, how valuable it was. So the key idea here is, I gave this talk at Harvard Business School once. They weren't that excited, but hey, that was my Harvard Business School talk. The idea is, organizations who want answers to the questions, they pick the questions they want answers to, they put a budget on it, they subsidize it to the degree of the value of their information. And then when people answer those questions, that takes away from that budget, takes away from the subsidy, and then that becomes a transfer of a color of money to other parts of the organization. And then people in the organization are authorized by their bosses to spend a bit of time in these markets. And then if they manage to accumulate a track record of being successful, they would be authorized to have more resources so they could do more. And then some people's jobs would move in the direction of providing information to the firm in various ways, and that would just be part of their role, but authorized by the fact that they had been given resources to do that with because they had had a decent track record, at least up until then, of achieving that goal. And this would be a way to do information accounting in firms. And we don't do information accounting now, we do cost accounting. So that's one potential thing we could do. Recursive juries. So I mean jury here in a very general sense, including the previous discussion about people making evaluations earlier an hour ago. Basically, we have all these situations in the world where we need somebody to make a decision, often in law, in governance, elsewhere. We basically pick a group of people, we say, here's your decision, here's some resources, here's your deadline, decide. And maybe sometimes we can give them incentives. And in that sense, a prediction market is a jury of this form, but so is a lone decision maker, et cetera. And an interesting question is, how could we have more juries in the world? And one way to do it is we could have recursive juries. That is, we could tie a particular jury to a later, more expensive jury that would have more resources, get more information, have more expertise, even have stronger incentives. But we only invoke that later one 10% of the time. And so we could entice better, incentivize better small, short-term decisions on the basis of these longer term things that might happen. And so we could create a recursive structure whereby each decision by a jury is incentivized by another jury that would happen later, have more resources, be more accurate in some sense, and then we could have better decisions all around. And a key question in this structure is, okay, how do you decide which particular juries that you would have in this recursive structure? That is, there's all these different dimensions. They could be how much later, how much bigger, which expertise groups, what incentives. There's a whole bunch of free parameters. How do we decide all those free parameters? And my observation here is we could use prediction markets to make that decision. So if you wanted accurate things, if you have so calibration is this key concept of if you say something happens, is a 10% probability, things like that happen 10% of the time. So statistical estimates tend to be calibrated, prediction markets tend to be calibrated, but other things might need a data set to recalibrate them, i.e. to correlate. But if you have calibrated estimates, then the most accurate ones are the most confident. Confidence goes with accuracy when you have calibration. So all you would have to do is have a prediction market predicting which estimates are going to be the most confident. And as long as you're picking from among a space of calibrated juries, then you will be picking the most cost-effective juries to put in the system. So we could decide which larger juries we would have disciplining our smaller juries by a prediction market on confidence. And if we don't have an ability to estimate calibration, then I think a substitute might be just consistency. If you have a set of related juries and they are predicted to give different answers, that's kind of suspicious. The more answers are consistent, I think that would be a proxy for more accurate. So you could just have betting markets predict the relative distance between various offered possible juries and have a tournament to pick that. So again, I'm trying to excite you with the possibility of what you could do here. We could basically have a system whereby whenever you have a question, you have a prediction market now about what those juries would be, and those juries would be set by another prediction market that decided which juries they'd be in terms of these parameters. And just a general system for answering questions. Academia. I initially started on prediction markets 35 years ago as a solution to academia and or policy questions. That is, I was actually with the group of people who were imagining the World Wide Web before there was a World Wide Web. So this was '89. And this was the Xanadu group. And their concept for how the World Wide Web would improve on our policy and conversations was that at the time when people said stupid things, somebody could write a rebuttal, but nobody would ever see the rebuttal from the stupid thing. But with the web, you could have links and backlinks such that you could find rebuttals, and that would solve the problem of us people saying stupid things and having people believe it, right? We've solved it, right? No? No, we didn't solve it. So I started to have doubts about this solution, and because all the people I was hanging out were rabid libertarians, the obvious solution that came to mind was, what if we just had betting markets in these things? Wouldn't that solve the problem of having bad estimates? And so that is the first thing that comes to many people's minds as what we could do with prediction markets to solve problem in policy and academia is let's just have prediction markets on everything everybody talks about, and that'll discipline them. Of course, the problem is nobody wants to bet in those markets, and the academics can just ignore whatever markets they are and say, well, that just doesn't mean anything, and that's so small, and who cares? So that doesn't really work. Another solution that comes to people's mind, which came to my mind, is, oh, it's the funders. If we can get the funders to fund research in a better way, well, then academics will have to do things a better way because the funders will demand it, right? And so, for example, we have this idea of prizes versus grants. Prizes are a better way to induce research than grants, so we should do more prizes. Turns out we did mostly prizes 3 centuries ago. There was a move from prizes to grants in the 1800s for political reasons. And there's a way to define an information prize. That is, if you subsidize a prediction market, in a sense, that's an information prize that would go to whoever learned the information. That would be a way to pay for research, except the funders don't care. The funders are just as much part of a game as anybody else. The funders aren't some outside force who care about long-term intellectual progress. The funders are people who want to buy prestige, just like students want to buy prestige and journalists want to buy prestige and all. That's what academia is mostly selling, is prestige. And we do a good job of that. The intellectual progress is a side effect that sometimes happens, sometimes doesn't. But that's my fix. I say the one thing academics won't give up, whatever else they'll give up, is this claim that a century or two from now, when people look back and say, who are the important people doing the important stuff, it'll be them. That's their key claim. That's why they claim you should go study with them, read them, have them give keynote talks at your events, whatever. The claim is, these are the important people doing the important stuff. That's what the future will say. That's my lever to discipline academia, because my simple concept is, let's have futures markets in what, in fact, people will say in a century or two about who are the most important people. And then make those be thick enough that we can highlight those evaluations right next to key choices. Like when Harvard hires a sociologist and they're not one of the top-rated people in these markets, we say, hey, Harvard, what are you doing? You say you got the most important people, but look, the market says Joe over here is much more important than the guy you hired. What's with that? And I think that would embarrass them to not make their decisions too far away from the markets. Of course, they would try to manipulate the markets by just using their harumph prestige to say, well, this is the right guy, and many people would trade and do that, and maybe you should believe them, I don't know. But the point is, there would be this discipline that, in fact, they would typically be giving money to and hiring, et cetera, the people that markets actually guess are going to be the most important in the long run. That would be my solution to academia. And solving academia as an academic is a pretty big deal. And the main thing we'd need for this first is some, basically, historian studies take people from a century or two past, have historians try to rank who among them was the most important, and just show that you can do that robustly. You do different methods, different styles, different techniques, that you could create robust estimates of who, in fact, was more important, or maybe even who should have been most important, who should have been listened to. Had they been listened to, things would have gone better, say. That's a little more to ask, but maybe not too much to ask. Okay, so that's how to fix academia. And we, of course, have lots of policy things we could estimate on, various policy questions we could have conditional markets talking about for healthcare and education and all sorts of other policy questions. I've said, and I still think it's roughly true, if you just gave me $1 million, this is my guerrilla marketing strategy. I go offshore and I create 1,000 markets, two each for each of the Fortune 500 or S&P 500, one of the two. And the two markets are estimating the stock price of that company, conditional on the CEO staying in power till the end of the quarter, or conditional on the CEO leaving power by the end of the quarter. That difference is going to be direct advice to the board about whether to keep or dump the CEO. And after, say, 5 years tracking the entire Fortune 500, I think we'd have enough stats to show whether or not the companies that follow this advice did better on average than the companies that didn't. And if that was true, you could start to shame and sue boards of directors who have a fiduciary responsibility to do what's most in the interest of their company to actually follow the market advice, at which point you would have reformed corporate accountability worldwide with 5 years and $1 million. That seems like a decent rate of return to me, but what do I know? Maybe you got better things to do. Fine. So if you want to just start a business and you're looking for making really a lot of money because you're just going to add a lot of value to the world, I would instead talk about new hire markets. Almost every organization of, say, 20 people typically hires a couple of people every year out of a larger pool of candidates, and there's typically a last round where, 6 candidates and maybe 2 of them will be hired. And in that last round, I would propose that we have conditional prediction markets on the employee evaluation if they're hired a year or 2 later. Most organizations have employee evaluations. Some take it more seriously than others, but the key idea is if you believe your employee evaluations, then you should want to hire people you will evaluate highly, and therefore you should want to hire the people who markets estimate will be rated as higher if you hired them. And that's something almost any organization can do. This is valuable to almost any organization, so it has a huge potential market out there, but nobody wants to buy this until they've seen somebody else try it and work out the bugs and make it work. That all, innovation is basically the combination of a few elegant ideas and lots of messy details, and the main thing in this area as and elsewhere is to work out the messy details by trying stuff and working through trials and varying things as necessary to make things work. But if you want, so I think we don't want just generic prediction markets as a product. We want prediction markets targeted to particular applications like new hires, where you're going to go to the customer and say, we've done this sort of thing for other people before. We know roughly how to do it, and here we're just going to do it for you now.
But in this case, that people trading in this prediction market would need to have access to the interviewing.
Yep. So that would have to be a condition that either you limit who can trade because you limit who's allowed to know about these candidates, or you allow more people to know about them as a condition of their application. Yes, that would be a thing. All right. Now, over the years, in order to inspire people to see how far this could go, I've tried to take it to what to most people seems the limit of governance. That is, so the story here would be for most of our governance, the following 3 facts are true. First, after the fact, it's not that hard to tell rich, happy nations, cities, whatever, from poor, miserable ones if you wait long enough. Secondly, the main way that governance fails is not by aggregating preferences, but it's by failing to aggregate information. That is, we just do so many things that just were the wrong thing to do for everybody, like invading Iraq or things like that. It wasn't that the different people had different preferences about it. It was mostly just, we just had the wrong beliefs about the consequences of the actions. And third, in order to aggregate information, the best institution we know of is speculative markets. We don't have anything else that's remotely close in terms of robustness and consistent accuracy, so that's the thing to use. So the answer then is use speculative markets to estimate what happens as a result of governance decisions. So here's your sketch of your current governance system. You down here, your representatives there. They pass bills, but there's various information institutions that mediate between all of them. And instead, now we're going to have, again, the representatives who pass bills, but these bills are now only bills to edit a national welfare function. They only decide what we want. And then over here, we have speculators, who are also part of these people, who can listen to whatever information institutions they want and estimate these parameters. National welfare conditional on some proposed alternative versus a status quo. And then if the idea is if this number is higher than that one, the bill is passed and it becomes law. And that's a simple application of decision markets to solve a very difficult fundamental problem we have, which is how to be in charge of government while not having all the choices depend on our ignorant beliefs about everything. We know roughly what we want as individuals much better than we know how any particular policy works and what effects it'll have. So we tell them what we want and how to judge it after the fact and let speculators decide what works. That's the idea here. And so the main rule is if a valid market estimates it's higher, of course, relative to some noisy epsilon, then it's law. Some details are, if we have an error in how we define national welfare, it might say you need to invade Canada right now. We go, that can't be right. We realize we must have some error in this national welfare function, and then we might want to go fix the error, but maybe we have to invade first, so that's a problem. So what we want is a way to veto decisions based on a market estimate of a future defined welfare function, and that becomes a way to do that. Every bill is a proposal that says, what it changes. I basically have an auction, maybe twice a day, there's a new bill, goes up. You bid, whoever pays the most gets the auction slot, but then if their bill passes, then the price difference is an estimate of the difference in national welfare achieved by that proposal and give them a cut as their reward for putting the bill up.
One quick question for you.
Yeah?
To go back on the last slide, the demographic that's voting at the bottom, do you need that to be a representative sample of total constituents, or if there's bias in the selection pool of participants?
The strategy here is you have a familiar world, and I want to propose a change to it, and I want to minimize what I'm changing. So I'm just trying to say, let's leave part of your world alone, and let me tell you the part I'm changing. I'm not a huge fan of the way we do things now, but I don't want to go there in terms of making a proposal change. I want to say, let's leave that alone and change this part as an intellectual strategy to get you to consider a change. We could separately think about how you might change this. I'm quite open to lots of ideas there, but for the purpose of arguing for this, it makes sense to just leave this alone.
Okay, so in this case, you are assuming general population participation.
Yeah, I'm trying to basically keep this all the same and make this change in order to have you think about this as a change. But of course, maybe you'd want to change this too. I mean, this is, basically the requirements are somewhat different here in terms of what you want from citizens and the timescale of reactions and things like that. So maybe that would justify changing the relationship here a bit, but okay. And you can define national welfare recursively over time in terms of how people will define national welfare in the future. So you can have an integral over the future, infinite future with finite assets that you trade. You can have futarchy at the high level, authorize futarchies at a lower level for doing the military or stadiums or something else. And nations could even have treaties with each other where they agree to include the other nation's national welfare in their national welfare definition as a way to directly take them into account. So that's why I would have the fundamental mechanism conservative. You don't want to you don't want to like push up the its ability to make many fast decisions or something. You want whatever decisions it makes to be solid, even if they don't happen very often, and even if you have a high threshold for any decision happening, because you want the base system to be conservative, just so that you can then, on top of it, build these other more risky systems who, if they break, the lower system changes or retracts them. Now, having given this sort of talk many times before, I just know many people have lots of objections. I will list some of them, but you guys are weird, so you guys may not have the same sort of objections most people do, but I'll just still let them pass your eyes up here in case one of them is, yeah, that's the one I had in mind. More concerns. And I will now take a few minutes and indulge you in my latest hobby horse, because there's an application of this. What's that again?
What if destroyed Earth?
Yeah, that's one of them. So the last few months, I've been very concerned about cultural drift. The key idea here is that, first, I realized fertility is a problem. World population is going to peak and fall. Births have already peaked. And the main causes of that seem to be cultural causes, various cultural trends that are reducing fertility. And thinking about those, I mean, there are some potential fixes, but it's hard to fix them because people like these cultural changes. And I realized that, in fact, there's an underlying problem, which is humanity has this machine, which is cultural evolution. It's the thing that distinguishes us from other animals. It's the power that makes us be so much more successful than all the other animals. But we broke the machine. That is, cultural evolution requires enough cultural variety for the evolution of things that cultures share. So this is only about that. Things that can be varied within a culture, like fishing technology or cars or things like that, this isn't a problem. But there are some things that cultures share, that is, there's norms that everybody in the culture has to do things the same way or treat things the same way. For those things, in order to have evolution of them, we need many cultures, enough variety and enough selection pressure on them, and a low enough drift rate internally for cultural evolution to work. 3 centuries ago, as we had that, the world was full of hundreds of thousands of small peasant cultures, each of which was near the edge of survival, had strong selection pressures, and conservatively didn't like to change very much. They didn't drift much. And then in the last few centuries, we merged these peasants into nations, having 100 or so national cultures. In the last century, we've been merging these nations into a international global culture of elites. So we have vastly less variety because we're rich and healthy and peace. We have much less selection. And we also seem to have decided that people who try on purpose to change culture are our heroes, not our enemies. We celebrate cultural activists as the people we love because we love the culture they've changed us into. And so we have very high rates of cultural drift, i.e. change not directed by selection. That's a key problem, and it's a much harder problem to fix than fertility. But among the solutions, here's my favorite. It's a long shot, but they're all long shots. We don't have any good solutions. But this one involves futarchy. See, that's the connection here. So the goal is, what if we could agree as a society, at least a big fraction of the world, a chunk, a big nation-sized place, that our sacred goal was to get to the stars faster. And so we set up a futarchy where there's a huge weight on the date we get to the stars. There's a definition of enough colonists out there that they can reproduce or whatever, right? And the key point is we pick a goal like this that's inconsistent with civilization collapse. So the futarchy looks at this goal and it says, if that's what you want to do, then you need to prevent this collapse, and so we're going to support these policies that do that. And then when policies start coming down from futarchy telling us how we have to change our culture, and we don't like it, it feels bad, because we would naturally be continuing to drift our culture. That's what we like, that's what enjoys. But now, when we see that this governance is saying, no, you shouldn't do that, if we put enough sacred value on this goal, we will say, yes, we will suffer that for this purpose, and we will be proud and happy to suffer for the sacred, because that's how people treat the sacred. They're actually proud to sacrifice for it. And then we might be willing to leave this futarchy in place and not change its goal for getting to the stars as soon as possible. And then cultural drift would have been solved by this commitment to this long-term goal inconsistent with cultural drift collapse. But you can see it's a really big ask. So I'm not predicting it'll happen, but it's one of the best solutions I can think of. But this should tell you that all the other solutions are worse, and so this is a really bad situation. If you don't like this, you won't like the other ones even worse. Anyway, so I'll stop there, and we will take questions and comments.
Can you help me understand the national welfare markets where people, so take the question like, should the public domain be extended? There are a lot of people who have a lot of money who want the public domain to not be extended.
Yep.
Who would completely ignore the national welfare dividend. And then a large number of people without much money or care for the national welfare of the public domain who probably do want the public domain extended but might not put up as much money to predict it. Can you help me understand when, like, one...
So a prediction market is not a weighted vote of people by wealth. That's the key. If that's your mental model, it's just wrong. So in most financial markets, there's only a small number of people who are active, but there's usually a huge pool of people eagerly waiting to swoop down if they see a consistent bias they could take out. So here, there might be some people with an interest in biasing these markets, but there's a lot more people who would happily swoop down and take that. So if there's some proposal, I don't know, to expand libraries, and all the library employees would like to go bet in favor of this proposal, even though it's not actually true that it'll increase national welfare. They just want to bet in favor of it. Well, lots of other people, when they get wind of that, they will happily jump on the other side and bet down. That was actually that sheep-wolf slide I gave you at the beginning. I guess I could go all the way back there perhaps, and that's a long way back though. But this is a key idea of, no, that's it. Basically, our simplest model of financial markets is there's two kinds of traders: informed traders and noise traders. These are wolves and sheep. And the key standard model is that wolves want to trade against sheep, not against wolves. Because if a wolf trades against wolves, on average, neither of them wins. But if a wolf trades against a sheep, they win because the sheep is an ignorant noise trader who doesn't know something. So that means wherever the sheep are, there's more wolves there. So wolves go where the sheep are, and when the sheep make bigger trades, the wolves make bigger trades because they're eating the sheep. So this is just how financial markets work in general. Wherever there are more noise traders, there's more informed traders who make more money and the prices get more accurate. Manipulators are sheep. That's the key thing to know. Somebody who wants to go manipulate a price because they want the price to be different, but they don't actually know anything. From the point of view of a wolf, that's a tasty sheep. You bet against them, you make money. So more manipulators is more sheep, is more accurate prices. That's the key sort of theoretical story.
I would love a market for the number of people who want to see the lessons, or at least the list.
All right. Well, let's do a vote instead, because Marta will be hard to set up. Who wants to see lessons? Who wants to see not lessons? All right. So, key idea is all innovation is simple, elegant ideas and lots of messy details. What do we learn there? So first, if you just want to do these things, I wouldn't get too caught up with the mechanics of markets and things like that. The key question to ask is, do you have questions that somebody actually wants the answer to? Do you have people who might be able to learn the answers to those questions if they put work into it? And do you have a way to incentivize them to actually put in the work? If you've got these things together, you can make a market. Now, if you want instead to prove that market's worth, you will need to add more. You'll need to have like numbers. More things that happen faster that you can compare against a status quo if you're trying to prove that it works. If you just believe that it works, you can just do these things. Now, imagine a usual C-suite. They all look like this. This is just a Jerry representative photo. Imagine you put around this table an autist, a person who knows this company very well but has no political savvy whatsoever. They have no idea what anybody wants to hear, what would bother anybody's agenda, et cetera. They just blurt out everything that pops into their head regarding whatever topics around the table. They will not last at this table. They might be taken as a useful advisor to one of these people before they go in the meeting, but they will not be at the table. But that's what a prediction market is. It's very knowledgeable, but it has no political savvy. And there's no way to control it, and nobody knows what it's going to say next. It just blurts out whatever pops into its head at any one moment relevant to the topic it's been asked. And that's very disruptive, just like it would be at this table, okay? That's a key thing to understand about prediction markets is they are politically disruptive, and that's a key to understanding why they have been difficult to field. So think about the example of a person with a deadline, a project with a deadline. This has been one of the most successful applications of prediction markets in terms of accuracy. There's just lots of projects where they have repeated meetings and they say, are we going to make the deadline? Yes, we are. You set up a prediction market. They say, no, you are not. Not like at 30%, like at 2%. They say, no, you're not going to make this deadline. And of course, they're right. And of course, being right, they embarrass whoever's in charge of the project. Why don't managers want a prediction market on their project? Well, it would help, of course, to be able to kill the project earlier. But if you're running a project, and you might someday, here's what you're going to ask yourself. If I fail, what will my excuse be? And you will want a good excuse if you fail. And here's everyone's favorite excuse if you haven't thought about it ahead of time. Okay, we were going along just fine right up until the last moment where something came out of left field, knocked us flat. That'll never happen again. Nobody would ever foresee that sort of, so let's just forget about this and go on. That's everyone's favorite excuse. And it doesn't work if you've had a reliable thing forecasting for a long time that you were going to fail. To make this excuse work, you need everybody at the meeting say, yes, we're going to do it. And of course, you can pressure them into saying that at the meetings, and you do. And then you fail, but now you've got your excuse. So the problem is prediction markets get in the way of the favorite excuse for failing to make a deadline. I mean, just to finish, basically, typical scenarios is some champion of a prediction market is called an innovator, but they tend to avoid the most important, interesting questions because that would be sensitive. Forecasts are accurate, users are satisfied, but maybe somebody gets embarrassed and kills the project, or the champion gets promoted and the successor doesn't continue, or they just do weak, uninteresting topics. Basically, managers are politicians. It's a thing you should learn about the world. The main role of a manager is a politician, not some scientific spreadsheet evaluator. That's not what the job is. But there's a hope that, like cost accounting, we could eventually make this a regular thing. So think about a world where there was no cost accounting, right? It just wasn't a thing. And on your project, you say, hey, everybody, let's do cost accounting. You know what people would hear? Somebody's stealing, we need to find out who. It would not be a welcome message, especially when some people are stealing, right? Now imagine a world like yours, everybody does cost accounting. You say, on this project, let's not do cost accounting. What will people hear? Well, can we just steal and not keep track of it? That's what people hear and will also not be welcome. So you can see there's multiple equilibrium, a world where everybody does it, where everybody doesn't. Same for prediction markets. In a world where nobody does prediction markets, you say, hey, let's do a prediction market as a product. You know what people hear? They hear, somebody's bullshitting, let's find out what the true answer is. That's not welcome to the people who are, in fact, bullshitting, who didn't want the true answer to come out, right? But in a world where everybody does prediction markets on every project, and you say, let's not do a prediction market on our deadline, how about that? What will people hear? They'll hear, you don't think we're going to make it, we should just not keep track of that, which would not be a welcome message. So anyway, that's...
Well, I was kind of hoping to go back to managers a little bit because, Butter talked about, these delegates in a system that kind of have a role that seems a bit similar to managers, but with mechanisms that are very quantitative on the performance of delegates, right?
Yeah.
So when you said, okay, the job of manager is like to be political rather than to like make measured quantitatively good decisions, like can we change that? Can we fix that by measuring the performance of managers?
I mean, for example, I was trying to do information accounting, which would go a step toward measuring the information contributions of managers and people and informations where decisions are made. So
that's kind of like if you provide good information into a decision process.
Right, I'm trying to have an accounting for that. Today we don't account for that, but with prediction markets we could do more information accounting.
Which I think of the manager is kind of more like the place where that information gets turned into a decision and measure them that way, or?
The robust way to think about managers is they sit at the bottlenecks. In hierarchies, the high-level managers are bottlenecks of everything. Everything sort of has to go through them. So anything you can take off their plate relaxes that constraint for all the other things they have to deal with. So the idea here, maybe take off their constraint information, off of their table, information aggregation and some decision making, and then they can spend more time on other things.
I guess part of what I'm asking too is like, can you evaluate them possibly using markets in a way that encourages less bullshit or less political behavior and more aligned incentives?
That is the question of capitalism. We've only had large organizations for 2 centuries now. We've gone a long way. Our organizations today are very different than they were a century or 2 ago. So clearly we are having rapid evolution of how we manage large organizations. So hopefully that will continue.
What do you think about micro markets, like super short markets, and also for super short? Yeah, like short term.
Microsecond?
No. Small, like for the weekend, like between friends, something like that. This and also in the opposite side, like something super long term about liquidity.
Sometimes people just want to bet on the sports game for fun, and that's a fun way to compete and have fun. I don't object to that, but I'm most interested in the valuable information, so I want to find the valuable decisions and make markets next to those.
Related to that, on the long term ones, like about the liquidity, if you put liquidity, like the value of the liquidity goes down over time, like do you think that's the solution?
For any institution, it's going to be harder to incentivize information that takes a long time to be resolved. That's just true for any mechanism. That's not particularly this mechanism. That's just a fact about long-term information. But if it's important enough, then it's worth paying more for it. Just pay the extra to do it. So about the bets, the whole point is the betting market, if they're crap, they just get weeded out and we don't listen to them anymore, right? So that works fine for the betting market. For the voting market, obviously we have all the usual problems of democracy still continue for the things we vote on, but at least that'll be a smaller fraction of things and maybe we could focus more on the problems there. But democracy has some serious problems. I don't know if you know. It's not at all an ideal system, but it's what we got. And here I'm just holding it constant for the purpose of not focusing on that and just telling you another thing. But I'm completely open to other things we could do there and have other ideas.
So huge.
Thank you.